Good evening. Welcome to the Historic Review Board meeting for Tuesday, March 25th. Now I'll call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call.
Board Member Edgar.
Here.
Board Member Lawrence.
Here.
Vice Chair Green.
Here.
Chair Powell.
Here. All right, next we have meeting minutes. There are quite a few of them. We can get this all at one time. All right. Do I have any questions, first of all, on any of the minutes or anything? Or if not, motion?
I move to approve. I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Board Member Edgar.
Yes.
Board Member Lawrence.
Yes.
Vice Chair Green.
Aye.
Chair Powell.
Aye. Thank you very much. Do we have any public comments on anything not listed this evening? Okay, moving on. Next is design advice. Christina.
For those who have not been involved before, we have kind of a design advice process, free, it's kind of low entry to be able to have applicants who... We have a design advice process that is free and kind of low entry for folks to be involved, to have the Historic Review Board make initial non-binding comments. It's a chance kind of to do a check before you dive in and move forward for a formal application. What we have tonight is a proposal of a detached triplex. So we have the existing house, which is a non-designated resource in McLoughlin, and 2 additional units. So a detached triplex is allowed in the zone if one of the units is older than 5 years, which we have that for the existing house. The block around it does not have a lot of locally designated resources. There's nothing directly abutting the property. I believe there is a designated resource across the street, maybe one over in the mid-block across the street on Van Buren. 2 things, actually, if Kay, if you could bring up the Google Maps real quickly. I just want to get everybody. So to your right, you see kind of the minimal traditional house. That is the main house on the lot, non-designated, and kind of the area just to the left is the kind of the side yard where the 2 proposed units are to be placed. You'll see on the site plan in just a moment, there's a line. The applicant will be looking at doing a middle housing land division, which will happen later in the process after the detached triplex is approved. And when you do a middle housing land division, you can cut up, in a sense, the pie pieces in whatever manner that makes sense. And there's no setbacks in a middle housing land division. The setbacks are all based on the parent lot. So when you look at the plan tonight, kind of visually remove that vertical line. There'll actually be additional line at some point to separate all 3 units. If you want to, Kay, if you could open up the site plan real quickly. That is not the site plan. Maybe the elevations. Okay, so these are the elevations showing the 2 units. 2 things I want to bring up before the applicant comes up. They've done two design options already that are reducing the massing of what could be built on the site. So if this was not in a historic district, they could build a 3-story structure, and they could potentially combine it into a duplex. So you could have had 2 units in one. They could have had a 17 by 40 foot long structure. So the fact that they've separated it into 2, there's no attached garage, and they're 2-story, I think, really is already showing how they are modifying their design to meet the district. On a staff level, I would recommend changes to window design and location. I think, removing the slider windows into be 1/1 windows, and then having some additional look at windows on the side elevations, I think are important. And that's something the board can talk to. But before we start, I wanted to just set the stage that they have done a fair amount of reducing the massing already with those 2 design choices of 2-story and separate. The site plan
does not show, oops. Ugh, a little psychedelic.
It's disappearing.
The site plan does not show the existing house. And I realized that I told Kay to grab the wrong PDF, but if you look in your packet, you'll see the site plan. And it shows the setbacks, but what it doesn't show on that site plan is where the existing house is located. And when this comes back to you as a full application, you will see, the house, the 2 detached units and all the setbacks between it. So with that, I want to bring up the applicant, and if you want, you can ask to go and take a look at any of these PDFs as we move forward. But this is a chance to the applicant introduce themselves and then really just have a conversation. It's non-binding, and you aren't speaking on behalf of the board, you're speaking on behalf of individual members. When this goes in front of the Historic Review Board in actual meeting, I will add this meeting into the exhibits. So this will be part of a future land use review.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Alex Shaw. Okay, hi. I'm Alex Shaw with Shaw Homes. I don't really have much to add. I think Christina kind of covered everything. Just looking for your comments really for now.
Okay. So, questions?
Well, hi, I'm Paul Edgar. One of the issues is balance of a historic structure and how windows are placed. And the current design show, as an example, where the house is the left elevation, there's a small window that's in where the bathroom is to be, the half bath. Even if it's a mock window for part of the wall, where it reflects kind of the same dimensional characteristics of the rest of the windows, maybe the top part of it is just black, but give it a look and feel. Then the upstairs windows, desirably, they should be 2 windows in balance.
Okay.
That meet specifications for egress.
Okay. What do you mean when you say in balance?
Well, they have the shape of a historic window that would be that would represent this type of house, period.
Okay.
That's found in McLoughlin neighborhood, and there's some around it that have done it. And it's where the relief to it is the window set in, and there's an outside relief around it, trim, that can make the window look more prominent by just trimming it out correctly.
Okay. So I proposed, I think, on my windows, I don't know if you can zoom in at all, but like a sill that kind of sticks out, and then an apron on the bottom, and then just 5 4x4 around the rest. Is that?
Yeah, that's what we're thinking.
Okay, cool. And that's what I copied some other houses.
A double hung.
Yeah.
No sliders.
Yeah, no sliders, yeah, of course.
And
yeah.
even the upstairs windows, like on the, if I go into the right and left type, if I get up there on the right side, again, if that window kind of has the same look and feel as the other windows, like the upstairs windows that you create.
Yeah, so you want single hung windows, basically,
So that
one over the other.
That
yeah.
creates
Okay.
a degree of balance.
Okay, sounds good, yeah.
And the rear, we just don't want any sliding doors.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm intrigued, honestly, with a tiny house and,
Oh, yeah.
and its livability, how it can, so inherently, it's been something that I've been interested in, believing that we have a need for creating more housing.
Yeah.
And so this part, I would love to see the end product.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Mr. Green, question? Either-
Well, basically, the window situation, which has been addressed, I noticed on the check sheet there, it specified single-hung windows, but then it showed sliders on there, so that would be a little bit of a dilemma in that in order to get egress, you would need a minimum of a 305 single-hung. So a pair of 305s, like on the front elevation upstairs, proportionally maybe would look a little big. But so you might do just a single 305 single hung. Alternatively, if you wanted, like a fairly typical dual window look, you could put a pair of smaller single hung windows in the front and put an egress window on the side, but of course that's more money and you lose some wall space. So I mean, I think in my mind, either would be satisfactory, but you just have to move away from the slider and get an egress single hung window, which would be a 305. The living room could be a pair of like 2040 single hungs or whatever in order to get that
Okay.
look.
And yeah, so just to clarify on the windows, you guys basically want no picture windows. You only want windows that have a crease, like you say, like a single hung window, no picture windows. So like on the side, I have windows that are just like one piece of glass. Those are like a no-go, right? You need to have
Sure.
a crease in the
I don't
middle.
know that I'd say we don't want any picture windows, no.
Okay.
No, I think if it fits, I mean,
Oh.
if it looks, period.
Okay.
Or, or if it meets the requirements,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
Well, I think we're just more talking about, on the big expanse wall, you want to try and get a little bigger window if you can get it
Okay.
there.
Okay.
I mean, that's my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, no,
You guys
that's-
have your own,
Are you talking about the right elevation?
sorry.
The right
The right
elevation?
elevation, yeah.
Yeah.
The left upper elevation, I'm not a fan of the horizontal windows. I mean, they were used occasionally. On that upper level, it seems like that could pretty readily be a single hung there as well, because that's in the hallway. I can see the intent of the rectangular window on the lower level because you're right close to the adjacent house. And, that could be a single hung window as well. I mean, each of those horizontal windows could be replaced with a single hung. I can see the intent in the main floor of having that, so you have more wall space and so forth. But I guess would be a consideration that the board members would have to kind of come consensus on. Other than that, really, the window issue is been mentioned. That would be a concern. I guess in my mind, I would see perhaps preferable for the front porch. It wouldn't necessarily be the case for the back porch, but to use a hip roof design. They're again not crucial, but the existing house has a hip roof on the front, and that hip roof porch is probably a little bit more typical for vernacular design.
Yeah, it is. You're right.
So that would be a consideration there. Again, I guess we'd kind of take the temperature of the board and see how important that is. And I guess lastly, it will, of course, being a two-story structure, be taller, noticeably taller than the adjacent house. you know, one option would be to give it more the appearance of a story and a half. It would require, I mean, you would have to move away from just a standard truss on your upper floor. But if you dropped like to a 6'6" plate height or whatever on the upper floor, I was looking at the floor plan, you still could accomplish everything without conflicting with your floor plan. But it is some more expense, and there again, I guess it would be a question of how distressing you might say the extra height is with the adjacent property, but it's very, very simple, attractive, compatible design for sure, in my mind.
There's a topology issue where how you go up the grade as you're going back on that lot, on the two lots. So the back house,
It'll have to sit higher, I would assume.
it's going to sit significantly higher than the front house.
Right.
Yeah, it looked to me like probably the back one will have to sit 3 or 4 feet higher than the front one because they're,
Right, because of the grade.
Because of the tiers.
Agreed, and I think that was one of my concerns is although in one case, you would see a differentiation.
Yeah.
Which would be nice, it's not
That would
gonna be
be
like two townhouses
Yeah.
next to each other, right?
Yep.
So I like the idea of a differentiation between the two houses as opposed to two block
Sure.
houses put right next to each other.
Sure.
And that was gonna be and that might be a consideration is to help with the differentiation.
But also in the front is the rock wall, okay, that is kind of a unique rock wall, so it's not like something I normally see. Look, must have been done by an individual who really wanted it. But that rock wall is going to have to be breached.
and
so,
they mentioned that in their,
yeah, but how it's breached and how it's finished out is something that needs to be thought through to make sure that it's done appropriately and retains that rock wall. Just by adding steps, but this is almost like a flag lot in the way, but it's without car or it's just a pedestrian flag lot.
No, I agree, I think it's just like a flag lot, it's just not quite as far back. Well, my big question was differentiation, you know, and color is one thing, and that's great, but I kind of like, I like Mr. Green's discussion about dropping that to a 1.5 story look as opposed to a full 2-story look. And I think if you could do that and then have the one behind it be a little taller, I think that would certainly add to the
Texture.
the texture of the whole piece. It just concerns you having two duplicate. It'd be like, you know, just duplicate homes right there. So that's my comment. How about you?
I think we're covering everything. I don't have anything to add, I don't think.
Okay. Any other comments?
The only thing I would say is that if there had been a lot of historic houses or properties right around it, that where what you're doing or recommending to me could have been a conflict, because it could have created a detracting element from other historic inventory, because it is the community or the neighborhood, the historic neighborhood that we're trying to protect. And so having something that's that does not detract is an important element. Just what you do, make sure that it is most appropriate you possibly can and not detract from the district as a whole.
Okay.
And I'll say, I think I like what you've done already. I mean, and you've obviously done some work to make it look like it's going to fit in there, and so I applaud you for that. It does look nice. I think it'll look good in the area. If you can make, you know, or at least review and see if you could make some of these changes, or at least talk about some of these changes, I think would be beneficial.
For the height thing, would you guys the 1.5 story look is kind of more difficult than, just doing like 2 stories and then trusses on top. If I, right now my trusses are 12-12 pitch. I could drop my pitch a little bit instead. That would make it a little bit shorter. But the 12-12 pitch is kind of a nice look. So I don't know if you have a preference there on dropping the pitch. If you drop the pitch, you get less mass. If you leave the pitch, it kind of looks a lot nicer in my opinion.
I honestly think the 12-12 pitch is appropriate.
I do,
I think that in my mind, it would be more important to retain that.
Okay.
But if the, you could, and one thing that isn't reflected, realizing the plan isn't fleshed out yet, if you're using a standard truss with the typical energy package, you have to use a raised heel truss. So you've actually got a little bit more overall height there than what you're seeing. So you could probably lose 2 feet of ridge height if you dropped your plate height on those upstairs walls to like 6'6" or 6'8". And in that case, you might want to do a vault. So you pick up the volume in those, and here I am spending your money. But I mean, these are just some options that are considered. That, if you drop that plate height, you're going to see at least a little drop, which is not uncommon in older houses on the side, just to to the 6'6" height.
No, I know the look you're going for sure.
They could give you a truss that would have a drop and probably get you up to a 9-foot ceiling. And, and you would pick up at least 1.5 foot drop on the ridge height. So that would be a consideration. I mean, that would make it more appealing as far as, not seeming quite so tall compared to the adjacent house, which is single story. So,
Yeah.
I did want to mention too, on the drawing on the right elevation, the horizontal window on the lower half, I think is okay. It almost looks like a piano window in some of the older homes. The upper one though, that's the one that causes me a little issue. On the left elevation is that would be, I think that would be better if we could get a larger window. I think I think it would benefit the whole design.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Any questions of us?
I don't think so.
Okay. Any other questions?
Oh,
Great.
I guess I do have one question,
Go
but
ahead.
not so much about this house, just in general. When I submit the land use application, is it usually the next meeting that you guys look at it? Is that kind of the
Yeah, there's a
idea?
20-day public comment.
Yeah.
And so if you work with Melissa this month and get it turned in by the end of April, you'll be on the May meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
Great. Well, thank you for coming in to talk to us. We appreciate it.
Okay, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.
Good luck on your project. Okay. All right, next. Our favorite, discussion on compatible change.
You invited her.
Hello, it's me again. To pester you for all sorts of details.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially on such a nice night, but here we are. Yeah, have you got a PowerPoint from me to pull up? Thank you.
I should have asked, do you have a staff report on this?
I do not.
Okay.
My staff report is, Kristen is here this evening, and her goal is to further winnow down the issues.
Good enough.
Kristen will ask multiple times, is this something you want us to continue to work on? And if there is kind of consensus though, like, we don't really want to involve this element, say it, so Kristen can take that off their plate. So I think each meeting, we have to continue making decisions because this is a grant-funded project, and by, June, we should be at a place with a pretty solid policy recommendation. I think it doesn't have to have perfect red lines, it doesn't have to be a perfect package, but what the board should be able to do by this summer, or, June, early July, is provide a policy direction and present that to the city commission this summer, requesting to go into the legislative process. So the legislative process can finalize red line code, and if there's a goal to adopt a new HRB policy on detached, small dwellings, we don't have to have it all resolved this spring. Like, that's something we can work on through the legislative process.
Okay.
Great. So this is our third meeting on the compatible change project. And I just wanted to first point out that you did get a memo. The memo included 2 exhibits on the back that I'll be talking about just a little bit. They're both about public feedback that's been received on this project so far. And those exhibits go into more detail than I will. I'm going to definitely be summarizing some of what we heard, but I hope that you've all had a chance to kind of read through some of those comments because, these are folks who have good ideas and, they're living in this neighborhood, and I think they did make some good points. So not everything is going to be reflected in my summary here tonight. So next slide. Great. This slide just basically kind of lists out what I'm going to go through with you tonight. First, we'll be talking about the public comments received, and then we can, I'll talk briefly about what I thought I've heard so far from this board, and then asking further questions of you, and then finally just next steps. Next slide. Great. So there are basically 2 ways that we heard public commentary, and those are the McLoughlin, I have a friend, anyway. McLoughlin Neighborhood Association meeting feedback, and that was held on March 6th, yes. And then the other one is the public survey, which went live for at least a month. I'm gonna, look at Christina, who's nodding, and closed on March 16th. So we received 47 responses to that all told. So the survey, let's see. Sorry, I need to put on my glasses for just 1 second. The summary of what we heard in the survey, I'm going to go through a couple of slides here. I didn't go through who responded to the survey, but that is in the exhibit that you received if you're curious, and I also summarized it in the memo. But the major questions that we asked of the McLoughlin neighborhood, first, what you value most about it. And a lot of people responded: the historic homes and architecture, walkability, and location. Next, gauging how people felt about the amount of change that they had seen in the neighborhood. And a lot of people did respond that it felt about right, that there weren't too many people who were strongly on one side or the other. Oh, there's not enough change, which there were a few of those people, or too much change. And then finally, how people felt about the level of regulation, if they felt like what was being built was appropriate, basically. And this was a great feedback because at least half of the folks who responded to this survey anyway said that they felt the level of review was about right. So that was, I thought, a really good takeaway. Next slide. And then the second slide here about the survey again, a question, getting into a little bit more detail, if we are going to continue to allow people to add on at about 30% of the existing size of a house, then should there be a maximum square footage level to that? And most respondents said that 30% was working just fine. Not a lot of people responded to that other question, whether a maximum square footage should be added in. The question about should a height limitation be added into the threshold for whether something is exempt or not from HRV review. And the responses received, some people straight out said no, but most responses were fairly nuanced. And if you read through some of those responses, some people talked about proportion and scale, others spoke about proximity to neighbors, and others spoke about taking into account the topography of the difference between perhaps two sites and wanting to make sure that there were eyes on a height limit in light of the fact that already, one area is feeling quite a bit lower than the other. So I thought those were pretty nuanced responses. And then finally, the question about adding in an exemption for a small dwelling unit. A fair number didn't answer at all, but the folks that did said essentially, yes, they were interested in this idea, and as long as there were some design controls, I think most people were supportive. Next slide. Now this slide is showing the feedback from the neighborhood association meeting. And what you see here are the two boards that were the dot exercise that people participated in. And Christina also might have some comments about the comments at the meeting. But when we're looking at that first board on the left, the additions was really the question here. So this is regarding additions to an existing structure. And the question was really, what elements of that should be reviewed? And a lot of people put stickies, as you can see, in those top four categories. But it's interesting also to see at the bottom, the yellow stickies that people added as comments included that elevations, etc., drawings essentially need to show the height and distance from neighboring buildings to scale. And quite a few people added their affirmative, little dot sticker to that comment. On the right-hand board, we're basically comparing kind of agree or disagree statements, just kind of in a range. And again, if you look at the bottom of this board, where people either supported a yes, definitely response to the question of adding in a small design, or a small dwelling unit, or a maybe with some design controls response. There really were very few people who didn't want to see an avenue for this at all. So it seemed definitely a strong support, especially between the two types of public commentary that we got in looking for a way for people to more easily build a small dwelling unit on the property.
Can you, just a second question there. Now, are you saying that, that the current regulations for ADUs or small dwellings,
Yeah.
is there this, right now, with 200 feet, square feet foundational size, wall size, is allowable or below, at or below. But above that, we talked about maybe taking it up a little bit. Now, how does that context into this question? How did the McLoughlin neighborhood people respond?
Well, the people who attended the meeting, and those are represented on these two response boards, felt fairly strongly that they could support an exemption for, I mean, the question wasn't asked specifically, would you support an ADU or a small dwelling over 200 square feet? But I'm assuming that they were thinking of a building over 200 square feet because that size doesn't even require a permit.
So that, they did, so if I read this correctly, that they think we should allow more construction, and then there was a disagreement.
So the upper part of this response board on the right, is that what you're referring to, Paul?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so the
second-
question is really trying to get at how, just gauging where people felt in a range of questions, starting with, there shouldn't be any review at all, let them build whatever they want. And you notice that starts with everybody disagreed with that, right? And so then we're kind of going down the list to gauge how much regulation folks felt comfortable with. And you start to get a more nuanced response. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, and talking to people that were there when we were discussing both this, most people were interested in seeing up to 300. There were a couple that said, well, maybe even 400 if the lots okay. So 300 was everybody seemed to be fine with that. The thing that concerned me a little bit is that most construction looks okay to me. You had a few people. Most of those people were looking at things that were outside our preview. We talked about, Christina made a point, this is only for the conservation district, it's only this, and people are still looking at the buildings on 7th Street and saying, oh no, you guys really made a mistake there. Well, we didn't even review those, right? So those were something totally different. So a lot of those came before that discussion. So we did get a few of these things that aren't exactly right. But by and large, I think people were interested and thought that the 300 square foot size seemed about right. Again, depending on the lot, if it was a bigger lot, maybe you could go up to 400.
So the lot would, square footage of the lot and what's already there.
Correct.
It becomes the delta.
As long as it wasn't, massing. I mean, they
Yeah.
were more concerned, as you could tell by the height. Height was very important to everybody. It says, no, you're not going to. We don't want a 2-story next to a 1-story or 1 house.
Yeah.
So that's a big issue. The size that's where you got people said, yeah, let's talk about the size. The 300 seemed to be where we talked about. Location, they didn't want they didn't want them like right next to each other. You know, if they were gonna build an ADU, it would be behind the facade or something different, so it wouldn't look like you were just trying to add on. So those are some of the questions that I fielded.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Powell. I'm glad you were talking to the crowd there.
Well, they were more talking to me.
Yeah, good point, good point. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. The next 3 slides here are kind of summarizing what I did hear so far from the HRB. And all of this, of course, is just to confirm with this group that I heard correctly and from a majority of HRB members. But I'll be diving further into each of these points with my specific questions after this. So the overall direction certainly can be clarified or changed. None of this is set in stone yet. So this first slide, let's see. The summary of HRB feedback on new freestanding construction, the HRB did state they're open to new freestanding secondary dwellings potentially being exempt from HRB review. I definitely heard from, I think, all of you that some level of design controls absolutely needs to be a part of that. And in terms of new non-dwelling structures, so again, we're sort of back to what the existing code allows, which doesn't specify use at all, right? It just sort of gives an allowance, 200 square feet. And I heard maybe one voice on the HRB say that it doesn't necessarily have to stay at 200 square feet. So we can certainly explore whether there might be a little bit more leeway in that.
Another comment, in this area, a building, a non-dwelling unit can migrate into a dwelling unit.
Oh, that would never happen.
Never happen. And so one of the questions really comes back about engineering review of the structures that, to make sure that whatever is built to a standard that potentially in the future, without our knowledge, something could happen. I don't know how to word this right or thought, but all I know is there's a reality that what happens, and I would love to make sure that buildings that might be ADU or non-ADU, but that are built, have correct engineering in them.
That problem is solved by the 200 square foot rule. And so right now, we have a shed. And what we're talking about is that if we change that rule to encompass 300 or 400 square feet, we're talking about an ADU. So if you make the rule that we can go without review above 200 square feet, then we remove that ability. So we can't have a relaxation of rules and a stricter set of guidelines at the same time. So we have to figure out a way.
Well,
exactly what you're talking
how about
about.
by definition?
I would suggest that everything that gets a building permit, they will look at the structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But if
anything over 200 square feet they're going to be looking at it.
So just real briefly, if you are building an over 200 square foot building, you are going to the building department to get a structural review, and if there is habitable space, they'll look at that part of the building code. We actually had one that was under 200 square feet and was habitable, and they still kind of looked at it, but maybe not from a structural state, but in like a fire life safety piece. one thing I want to add to this conversation is a little reality hat. A dwelling unit pays system development fees. A dwelling unit is a full dwelling unit with permanent cooking facilities and a bathroom and a place to sleep. Oregon City right now, we have, a standalone, small, like a either an ADU or a detached duplex. They're almost the same cost, but it's about $26,000 for system development fees. And so I do want to put all that piece of knowledge in your thought process about whatever you do, make sure that you don't constrain this waiver so small that people are never going to choose that because it doesn't pencil. So that is a conversation of what is a reasonable sized dwelling unit that you would want to exempt with of course, design controls and clear and objective materials and things like that, that people would be worth it. Because if you're sending people down the path and they're going to do their 300 square foot dwelling, but they look at the price tag of SDCs and they're just coming back to you anyway because they'll need to do a 400 square foot one to make it pencil. One day we may have a more, a range based on square footage, but right now we don't. We have it based on use, duplex, EDU, single family. So right now the size doesn't change your system development fees.
But that doesn't really, the question I think Paul's asking is, if somebody comes in and wants a 200 square foot or a 300 square foot structure, and it's only going to be used for storage.
Yeah.
And then 2 years from now, it's now a condo.
Well, then they're getting no building permits for anything they do inside. So they have a completely unpermitted project, and that's just an unpermitted project, and that would go through code enforcement.
Sure.
So if the moment they come in for any piece of a building permit, they're going to be reviewed as a habitable structure. Now, you can have a detached, like, studio that has a bed, in your office. That's not a dwelling unit, but that is reviewed as a habitable structure. So the building code would look at that.
In wearing another hat, trying to promote shelter housing, temporary, affordable post and beam that we can put up, that where a homeless person could be put, or an addicted person could be put to sleep overnight or for a period. This is in lieu of putting them into a jail cell. And so we create a controlled area with shelters that are affordable, okay? And they got a bed in them, but they're really almost a shed. They are not almost a shed, they are a shed with wiring, walls, most often no plumbing or anything like that. So they are strictly for temporary housing of someone in lieu of putting them into a jail if they are caught, like under the new 110 revisions. And we need a place to put them, a drop-off place.
Well, I agreed. I mean, there's a need for that. But in this discussion, what we're talking about,
Yeah.
in the historic district or in the conservation district, I don't see that happening. I don't see that as something that people would, that we would do.
A homeowner won't do that.
A homeowner won't do it. We don't have the space to do something larger than that.
But I see what we're talking about, though, is something that's kind of across the city.
Sure,
Not
and
just HRB.
That's a great question for the planning commission, right? Because that's outside our purview, and I think for what we're talking about, it seems to me that, we're looking at people that want to put an ADU in their backyard, or...
Right, think of it as a mother-in-law unit.
Yeah.
That's
like
the
I know what
classic,
we're
right?
talking
That people want to build something in there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, next
I feel like we're
slide.
talking about my treehouse.
Now, what I have heard so far from the board regarding alterations and additions, again, existing non-designated properties, I think the existing percentage allowance for additions allowed isn't working for those alterations that change the roof line. So that is definitely something I heard from this board, that there really needed to be something to address those issues. An existing house dramatically changing the roof line. I didn't really hear anything supportive or not supportive about the 30% threshold, all told. Again, I think most of the folks that we heard from in the public felt like that was a reasonable threshold. If you all do support it, I'm hoping to hear some actual, some feedback from you about that. And I also didn't hear anything from the board about adding in a maximum square foot area to that 30% if we stick with 30%. So such an idea would be, say, perhaps there's an 800 square foot maximum that could be allowed, and that would get you, oh gosh, let me see my math here. That would be let's see, so 30% of like a 2,000 square foot house would be 600 feet. So I guess a 30% of maybe 2,400 or 2,500 square foot house would be 800. So just to put those numbers in your head. I also heard the board say that you are supportive of putting in a height limitation or restriction. Okay, great. Next slide. Finally, the third sort of area that we're looking at is code clarifications. And, that's really sort of how to measure and what exactly to exempt from HRB review. So just kind of homing in on what those terms mean. And in the last meeting, the HRB was very much leaning towards a definition of existing area as the gross floor area that's already in the code, and that's basically enclosed space. And I will point out that using that same definition, applying to new additions, could create a bit of an issue just because porches and decks would not be subject to review if we used that same definition. So I didn't hear this board say anything about using two different definitions, but there's no reason why we couldn't. So if you wanted to measure the existing area using the gross square foot calculation, and then kind of the 30% or whatever's allowed using a slightly different calculation, that is just fine. But I didn't really hear this board say anything about that yet. So with all of that, I'm ready to throw a few other slides at you and really see if we can dig in further.
Well, is an enclosed
Go ahead.
deck? I mean, would you consider an enclosed deck as part of the enclosed gross floor area? I mean, even if it's not weatherized, even if it's just
a plastic.
or even or a screened in porch. I mean, is that considered, because it's enclosed, so that's
A summer deck.
yeah, summer deck. Yeah, I mean, and so that's a question is, because somebody could say, hey, that's enclosed.
But it's not a
Jen-
hard wall.
I'll let Christina try
If
to
we're
answer
using the
that.
gross floor area, it's a fully enclosed. So I think what Kristen said is, that's a tool we can use, but I think what we're looking for tonight is kind of, I always call it the numerator and the denominator, how are we talking about how we define what is there today and how do we define what is being added. So if we use gross floor area, we would not be including uncovered decks and covered porches. Unless unless it's the one of those where like they took the porch and they put all the windows, there are some homes where like over the years they turned that porch into a room. At that point now that's enclosed, but you think of your traditional front porch, that would not be part of the definition of gross floor area.
Agreed, right. Yeah, I'm more interested in if somebody added on a large deck out back and then enclosed it and then covered, and literally enclosed it, because there are a few of those out there, and whether that would, and then they, you know, and would that be included, because it is taking up the space, would that include the gross?
Yeah, so one thing you could look at is, look at gross floor area for the number, but, covered porches could be potentially included, or covered areas could be included in the 30%. That's one thing to think about, like, it's, just to make sure that someone isn't building like a rear porch that is the biggest thing the setback can allow, right?
That's my concern, is
Right.
we want to try and make this easy
Right.
for staff.
Right.
And so we need to define that.
Right, so, and we don't have to.
Yes.
I think this is still like policy direction, so like I'm hearing is, we want to make sure we encompass in covered additions, regardless if they're closed or enclosed, in the 30%. And then.
I think so.
Yeah, and then uncovered decks is this conversation that we had at the neighborhood meeting of what happens when the deck is taller than 3.5 feet, which is the threshold for a permit. And because McLoughlin is topographically different, you might have what very much looks like a rear at-grade porch, but the back end, a rear at-grade deck, but because of topography, the back end might be 6 feet tall, but you would
3
never.
feet up.
Yeah, you would never notice it because of, right. So, but maybe a second story porch is a different animal than your rear, a second story deck uncovered is a different animal than a ground floor deck that may just happen to be enough to get a building permit because of topography, but is really in the rear and not really impacting anybody. So those are things that were talked about.
Yes, thank you.
One thing that was mentioned was, perhaps a matrix, and as I kind of looked through some of these topics that interrelate, and trying to think of how to address those, I came up with, in my own mind, what might be some rationale, and obviously the standards could be adjusted or whatever like that, but taking a piece of all of them. So I was thinking the 30% seemed to be pretty acceptable threshold. So I like the notion of a 30% of just basically the footprint of enclosed area. And by the enclosed area, that would be walled-in area, not covered porches, but a 30% of the footprint area, not the gross floor area. Because if you take a 1,000 square foot single-story house, you've got a 1,000 foot footprint, that would accommodate a 300 foot addition. But if you had a 2-story 1,000 foot footprint, that will accommodate a 600 foot, which could be a single level 600 foot addition. Now that's 2/3 the size, the footprint you're increasing 2/3. So I like the notion of just using enclosed footprint and 30% of that. And then taking a 30% increase on roof area, just in a flat plane measurement. So you're not taking into consideration different roof pitches as you look down on it, which would kind of address like porches and covered areas. So if it fell within the criteria, let's say of an enclosed area, but they want to put a big covered porch on it, now that extra roof area pushes them into review. We talked about volume, and it would not be hard to include a 30% volume, because the same thing can apply if you have a single level house, your volume, and you put a 2-story addition that may not go above the height, but maybe had a shed roof. the volume then can visually overwhelm. So that would be the third piece, would be a 30% increase in volume, there again, of enclosed area. And then fourth, just not to exceed the existing height. And then optionally, you know, we want it seems like very definable, easily measurable criteria when it comes into staff. I mean, there could be an optional, say, just match existing roof pitch if it's, if they're doing a different roof pitch or something, that kicks it into review. Or optionally, if there's more than a 30% increase in decks and porches, that could be an optional.
No, Robert, are you talking about additions only?
I'm talking about
Your
additions
list?
only.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just making sure.
Because I see the discussion on ADUs is entirely different, honestly.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, looking at the outbuildings, part of the criteria that I like would be a single-story outbuilding would be approved, and I looked at a square footage of 310 feet, and you might say, where in the world did you come up with that? But that's 22 by 14, which would be a kind of a nice single-car garage. 22 by 14 is like 308 or something. So if it was a 300-foot deal and somebody wanted a 22, okay, you got to have to be 21 and a half feet by, you know. So I thought, you know, a 310-foot single-story outbuilding. I like the notion of existing conditions, but I think that ideally there should be a 2-year look back. Because homeowners are very unlikely to do a strategic development to get outside of, you might say, to avoid review. But a speculator would be the likely one that would look at a strategic development just for certainty, if nothing else, of what he can do. And a 1-year look back might mean like a 16-month turnaround, and a developer might be fine with a 16-month turnaround to just do what he wants and not have to run it through review. So I like the idea of a 2-year look back. The ADU thing, I think honestly needs to be a further discussion, because I don't think hardly anybody's going to build a 200 or 300-foot ADU. It's just not going to pencil out. You know, Portland allows them up to 800 square feet, and you know,
No setback.
What's that?
0 setback.
Well, in some cases, yeah, but there are so many ADU plans, and so I think that's a scenario where we wouldn't probably even be able to hold to not being higher than the existing building, particularly because they're almost the same thing as middle housing, what we just looked at.
Yeah.
So if the only distinction between that and an ADU really is just a property line, and so if middle housing is going to allow what we looked at, which is going to be taller than the existing building, the person next door that wants to build an ADU says, well, how come he could do it and I can't? And, well, it's because he's got a property line. Well, that's going to be a hard sell. So do you see what I mean?
No, you've lost me. I mean, accessory dwelling unit and detached duplex are almost the same thing. So someone could, a small dwelling unit is just a small dwelling unit. So, you know, they could still build a detached duplex. I think the question is there a path for them to not do it through the historic review board process? Kind of like the carrot. Like, we want to, I see it as, we want to encourage more compatible one-story addition, like one-story standalones. So here's your carrot. Here's some historic review board policies on material design, you know, dimensional caps, but go forth, get your building permit. If you want to do a detached duplex or an ADU, they're really almost the same thing.
Oh.
Oops. Do we need to stand up?
Well, it's time to go.
There we go.
Somebody needs to adjourn.
Somebody usually says last call.
Lisa, that's what I see it as, you're providing an incentive. We want to incentivize, smaller, one-story, good design projects by exempting you from a hearing. Because some people see hearing and go, I don't want to do this.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's
And
true.
so the thing is, the conversation I'm hearing, I worry that if you curate it too much, you've lost your carrot, and people are still just gonna say, well, I can't do the thing you want because it doesn't pencil, so I'm either just gonna come to the board anyway, or I'm just not gonna do it. So my big ask is, think about, you're creating an incentive, not necessarily an additional control, right? You want to say, we want you to build these type of things, and therefore we will waive the hearing process.
It's a big deal because right now with that carrot, we want people to come before us and ask the right questions. So we reviewed a project on Malala Ave where we just did it again last week, where we had to move the property 18 inches to accommodate the PUE on it. I don't know exactly what's going on next door, but it's not a historic conforming property, but it sure looks like they're building an adjacent building to the property next door to it. So on one side, we have a property where we have some semblance of, hey, this is a historic home, we can discuss it, we can talk about things. And I'm almost positive, and Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, I have no idea who's applied for what or what's going on, but it sure looks to me like they're building another unit on the adjacent property, which.
But that's outside the district.
Yeah,
It is,
right,
it's
so it's a
outside the
landmark.
district, yeah, so we have a designated landmark where we
Yeah.
had some say in what's going on.
Right.
And then right next door to that building now, they're gonna build
Yeah.
God knows what. It doesn't matter. So having any carrot to bring people to have some reasonable design, is massively important.
Agreed, and I think the idea of having a matrix, as you've called it, which could be a new HRB policy about these types of small dwelling units. So that policy can certainly be created, this summer, and just sort of talking through some of the things that really need to be on the table. Again, you want it to be more of a sort of a checklist. This should be very easy to administer, but also needs to ensure sort of compatibility just as an infill piece to the whole neighborhood. So not necessarily trying to, perhaps, yes, you want to specify that the roof pitch should match the existing, but you don't want to get so specific that you're starting to say, oh, each style needs to have this or this, because again, we're talking about non-designated properties, and I think it's going to be difficult to kind of pick out even what style some of these are. So trying to keep it simple, but trying to give people a pretty easily defined menu that they can build would hopefully get you a few nice little dwelling units.
I once had a renter of mine, Masscord Building Designs, and they rented from me, my property. And
My house is a mascot house.
And what I'm thinking about is, could we have buildings or where designers could have ADUs that they could bring in and have a kind of like an engineering review, design review, and now they're sitting on the shelf, a kind of pre-approved plans, and we
Permit
open the
ready.
door to try to bring some of this stuff in. My real reasoning, within all of this stuff, is somehow we've got to try to reduce costs of minimal housing and try to get it down where we get more people with roofs over their heads that they can own.
Your
And that's
mic's
the
on,
goal.
Your mic.
Excuse me, the goal is to try to get it to a point where we can do smart things that enable less cost, more efficiency, and if there's some, if we could get design people to say, okay, I want to submit this, or we solicit for them to come in and start coming up with some plans that can be put together. Somehow where we're pushing to try, say, can we, through pre-planning, get something that allows it to happen faster at less cost?
I think that whatever criteria we settle on, in other words, if a business wants to accommodate that, it's there. So in other words, if we say that there's a 310-foot limit or a single story, 400-foot limit or whatever it is, then it's up to the marketplace. If there's enough marketplace, the thing of it is, so many things are site specific.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of unlikely.
So cities have done, design requests, and they're expensive, and then the city ends up owning it, and it all sounds great, and then it's not used as much as people think it's going to be used. So it's one of those great ideas that don't often, meet the money expended to do it. But, to me, it's more of, can we create really good HRB policy number 13, so we do get what we think, which is a small, cute, one-story design that really could work all over the district. Next to bungalows, next to vernaculars, next to Queen Anne's, next to odd 1930 minimal traditionals that have been changed, 4 or 5 different times, like we have the building tonight. So I think one of those standard small outbuildings can match many different architectural styles that are next door.
In that one story, could we have a sleeping loft?
Yeah, yes. So what you can't do probably we can decide what our definition of one story is.
Right.
I would say I would use feet, like how many feet, because
Overall height.
we measure the height as the midpoint between the top of the peak and the bottom of the eaves. So depending on your roof pitch, you can sneak like a little baby story in, but you're not going to get a full story. Depending on specifically where we decide that number is, you could definitely get a ladder and a sleeping loft, but we don't have to decide tonight, but that's one of those conversations of how low do we want to have the one story for the height, and what do we want to exclude or allow by matching that with that height.
Right,
numbers.
I'm just not interested in somebody rolling in a trailer and putting it on a foundation and just dropping in a pre-made home. I mean.
Well, and I think with the siding, the windows, the front porch, we can design, in a sense, maybe, a smaller, front porch design that is just you can have this kind of front porch, you can have a hip roof front porch, or you could have a peaked front porch, and your height's this, and minimum porch dimensions are this, and, that can be, as long as it's checkboxy and it's not, 2 pages long, that's
Right.
gonna get you, what you're looking for.
So tonight, I think the big question on this is whether the HRB supports creating a policy for these small dwelling units that would be exempt from HRB review. And it's not going to be something that, we can create through this process. It'll be with Christina, and it'll be after this is over, but I guess
So that would be something then, Christina, that might be a goal for the next
Yeah,
work area.
how I kind of see it implementing is through this process, there'll be a couple pages of
Right.
historic review board's proposal to the city commission. We went out to the community, we talked about these things, we proposed, and I kind of see it in like a policy. And then you're asking if the city commission agrees, and then they would direct staff to start a legislative process to do red line code, and then concurrently work on HRB policy 13, which would be, new small dwelling units. And so the HRB policy would be created through kind of parallel to the legislative red lines.
But I think part of that process would be to bring you back a draft of that policy. And I'm kind of wondering if what might be helpful to you is to, if you think you might want to consider a policy, to get something back and see what it looks like and start like wrapping your arms around it before you actually say, yes, we want to go this way, or no.
Yes.
I feel like there's too many unknowns for you, and so maybe you need something to react to
Yeah. Give us a
Yeah,
good
I think
direction.
not so much in stone that you're blessing and adopting it right now, but enough that you can kind of see the elements and
Yeah.
then, know that it's still, a little bit of a work in progress.
So, be clear, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I see that there is a discrimination there. In other words, we could take a deeper dive into ADUs per se, which are distinct from just habitable space. In other words, if you built a little backyard studio and it doesn't have an oven and this, that, and the
Right,
other, it's habitable space, that would easily fall in the compatible change bucket.
True,
So-
and in a sense, if you go down that path, you're saying, we support housing so much that you actually do have to have a new dwelling unit to get this kind of exemption policy. And since you're providing a new full dwelling unit for our community, and therefore you can have this exemption, but if you're just building yourself an office and a game room, then maybe you're going in front of the historic review. The whole idea is we want new dwelling units, right? We're a community that wants to add dwelling units, and we're in a housing crisis. So that's one way to think about it, is it's that piece. And I do want to, I use the term new dwelling unit because an ADU is, you don't really use them as much. That was a kind of prior to mill housing. It still exists, but the difference between ADU, which kind of stays on the same lot as the house, and a detached duplex, which could be a middle housing land division in the future, both are new dwelling units. So they kind of, they're their own different animal, but they're both new dwelling units. And that's why I use that term, because it encompasses detached duplexes and ADUs.
And that's why I guess in my mind, there's merit in a little deeper dive in ADUs per se. Because in particular, because of the middle housing mandate, we're constrained to, you might say, approve, like the one we looked at, that's taller, that wouldn't.
No, you can do this. I think a new dwelling unit, you can say when you do a new dwelling unit on your lot, regardless if it's if it stays on your lot or one day it gets separated and sold off, it's a new standalone dwelling unit.
It's a new
Yeah.
the middle housing, but
Yeah.
looking through the criteria, I don't see anything in our existing criteria where it says it can't be higher, let's say, than the existing building.
Well, you would create a policy so that just play it
Right.
out.
You would create
Yeah,
that
you would create
criteria.
HRB policy 13, which is our,
Okay.
and it would say, new standalone dwelling units, either on non-designated and designated, that's a conversation you can have.
True.
Choose one of the two, can be built if they meet the following: setback from the main house, horizontal lap or channel siding of between 4 and 6 inch reveal. One, fiberglass wood windows with the following dimensions, 1/1, at least. And so you could define window transparency by linear feet of windows per wall face percentage. There's different metrics you could
Sure.
use to make
Sure.
sure there's enough windows, they're 1/1, casement, or, awning. So be a checkbox. Do you have a porch?
Right.
Does your porch have a minimum dimension of at least 5 feet deep? I'm just making up numbers, but that's the checkbox that the planner staff would look at.
But in either case, that's a new dwelling as
Yeah.
opposed to just an outbuilding.
Yeah,
So
that
for
would be if you want a new dwelling.
Yeah.
and you meet this, you could go get your building permit and not go. But if you built a new 600 square foot office and game room, then maybe you're coming from the historic review board because you aren't providing a benefit. Like, you know, this is not a new dwelling unit. You're just getting reviewed.
Addition.
You're just, yeah, it's a standalone addition to your house.
Yeah. Yeah, in each case, now we're talking about standalone as I see it. Yeah.
That's right.
That's, yeah.
So that, the carrot is the dwelling unit part. So some people do like a mother-in-law, but they just do a bathroom and a bedroom.
That's true.
Well,
And that's not a dwelling unit, just so you know, that's just a.
yeah, I mean, you know, the ongoing dilemma is I built a studio and it's got a bathroom, and as soon as you got the final inspection, then a little more goes in and they've got an ADU, and that's non-conforming, you know.
Yeah,
so
and we can't.
you can't
the
do anything
HRB
about
policy
that.
won't solve that problem.
But I mean, for the purposes of, you might say, what would streamline people that do want to come in? I mean, because in my mind, we're probably looking at a different square footage. If somebody wants to build a studio, you know, an art studio or whatever like that, and is fine with the 300, let's say 310, you know, a 22 by 14, if it's an ADU and it meets all that qualifications, it seems like then it should come in without HRB review. But for the person that wants a 680-foot ADU, that's a different animal, and that's a new dwelling.
Yeah.
It has the stove, the oven, all the factors that a new dwelling. It's going to have the SDC charges, correct?
Any new dwelling
Any new
is going
dwelling,
to have a
yeah.
SEC.
So there's a distinction between a new dwelling and a standalone addition that is not a dwelling. And
It
that's,
would be hard pressed to be under 450 feet to
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about what we're talking
So I think this criteria, you know, if we can zero in on that with a single-story outbuildings and a matrix for the add-on, realizing that there may be a deeper dive at some point for ADUs and so forth.
We have a carriage house garage in our neighborhood that has been rented out to a person where they live in it, been living in it for a year, separately from the house. And it's not too far from where I live, but anyway, I was trying to find out what the status was of this house that once had been for sale and pulled off the market. And they said, well, they're trying to rent it, but they won't rent they want to rent the house by itself because they already have the garage rented out as a living unit. So, how these things happen, they just kind of gradually happen. And, but one of the things I'm hoping for is that I would like to see Christina put together a mock outline of maybe the checklist, like we're kind of talking about, something where we could just get a working draft of what makes sense. And she's been around long enough to make 90% of those judgments of what we should be thinking about.
So this slide actually is really trying to get at those two different types of standalone structures, right? So on top, some of these, or maybe in addition to quite a few others, but, certainly you're going to want to look at really listing out, as you say, Paul, all of these elements that are going to go into the policy. And if you like, before I finish this compatible change project, Christina and I could potentially come up with something that then would get worked on further in future. But it sounds like you all are open to this idea of having an exception for a potentially larger freestanding that does get specified in its use and has to meet all of these criteria that you're going to be
Right.
laying out in the policy.
I think that's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. The other piece of this, as, you know, freestanding other construction, are those new pieces that don't meet this criteria. So if it is a garage or a shed or a new bedroom, I think it was you, Robert, who suggested 310 square feet. And then also, would you want these to only be single story? That would be another question, just to specify what these are, considering that it is mostly going to be used for new garage. And then if they're larger than this, or if they don't meet that criteria, they can come here in front of the HRB, right?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable,
Yeah.
because this, as I see it, these are not design guidelines that anything comes to us says, no, that's not acceptable for some reason. This is basically just a fast track for projects that are minimal enough that they can slide, you know, right in with the staff evaluation. And I think a single story limitation for outbuildings is reasonable.
I do too.
Very much so.
Because even with a single story building, like you said, you can do a little loft
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
You
And,
dig down.
you know,
A basement.
5 foot step down.
yeah,
I've been trying to, looking at trying to build a freestanding little garage out in front of my house where I could have my charging unit for my electric vehicle. And boy, trying to figure out how to do it under 200 square feet has been been a test.
I hear you. Okay, well then we can work more on maybe, you know, what that square footage is, whether it's 310, whether it's 250, whether it's something else another time. But I think this is great for tonight, and I appreciate it. Next slide. Let's see if we can just spend maybe another 10 minutes here tonight. I don't want to overstay my welcome. Okay, this slide is really about alterations and additions as well as clarifications to the code. So new construction, really how to measure it, and you know what the definition is. So let's see, if we are using the gross square footage, or potentially another definition that is, I was jotting down your ideas on this, Robert, which you think?
Footprint of enclosed area.
Footprint of enclosed area, thank you. That's great. That's a pretty workable definition of measuring existing area. And then I guess the next question is, what should that area include for the allowance that is, you know, that is exempt from HRB? So potentially it's that 30%. That number could be tweaked, but I think so far, you know, there's no reason to tweak it until I hear from you otherwise. But that 30% allowance for an addition, so do we want to look at the existing roof form and pitch and say that that roof form and pitch may not change more than some small percent? Of course, we want people to be able to add a dormer or two, right? So it has to be able to change some degree. I don't know quite what that is or how you feel about that, but that would get at the question that you raised early on in this process where you said, look, people are dramatically changing the roof line and pitch of an existing building, and, you know, they're not really adding any square footage, so they're not, you know, it doesn't require, you know, us to review it. So I guess my question is, should we be defining that the existing roof form and pitch shouldn't change by some percentage?
When you say roof form, you're thinking slope, is that?
Right,
Okay.
right.
Because I'm picturing the calculator math, so I do.
The slope, thank you.
Yeah, I
Yes,
want to
that's a
make sure
better
that like
definition.
your slope is 8/12. You are still proposing 8/12. Your your height is this. You are still proposing this. And then I think one thing that was new to the conversation is square footage of roof, right? It makes perfect sense, but I'm picturing how to make sure we do the math and make it easy for the applicants to show, you know, the addition of square footage of roof, and then, you know, how we can be easily analyzed, so.
Right. So next, just talking about using that same definition and how to treat, again, those tough elements of porches and decks. So the existing policy document, which I think is number 11, porches and decks, that guide applies to designated structures. And what we're talking about through the Compatible Change Project are undesignated. So they don't have to align exactly, but I know this board is still, you know, it still might seem overly generous, let's just say, to not measure any porch or deck in the area that is exempt from HRB review. So I think that's definitely worth thinking about. And because a roof structure is necessarily going to be attached to an existing building, which again might be historic, even if it's not designated, I might focus on limiting the area of open but roofed area allowed as an exemption. Okay, and I think that was one idea, you know, that was raised here tonight, is really using roof as, you know, as one measure. I would say that maybe there's a way to allow for eaves that match existing and is not going to penalize that person. You know, if they have an existing home with really wide, deep eaves, it necessarily means if they're matching those that, you know, they don't get as much square foot, right? So maybe there's just a way to say, oh, and we're not measuring the eaves as long as they match the existing.
I think that's fair.
Okay, great. And again, as Christina was trying to explain, if decks are perhaps no more than, you know, 36 inches, I think the code says 30 inches from grade is, okay. So if it's at least, you know, perhaps 36 inches from grade, they don't count in the calculations. And perhaps there is some allowance for a second-story deck if if the area is quite small. So I guess I'm throwing a lot at you right now and wondering what you think about how to count that exempt, that exempt 30%.
The decks don't bother me a lot in that when you view this structure, you are looking at the whole. Oftentimes the deck is on the back, it's not particularly visible. Front porch is a little more visible. But If it doesn't have a roof over it, even if it's 4 foot off the ground or something like that, if they are, I don't see that as justifying a larger enclosed addition. You see what I mean? In other words, by including that footage in the existing, that would justify a larger enclosed addition. So I mean, I like the notion of the enclosed area and then a percentage, 30% or whatever, being the enclosed area. You know, optionally, you could say you could add 30% deck area. They probably wouldn't if they have a large deck. But I mean, that could be an optional part of the matrix where if an addition has a deck that is more than 3 feet above grade, then if it's not more than 30% of any existing decks on the house, it goes in. Otherwise, it triggers a review, which means they'll probably build a deck later.
The other thing too is that in any situation where there's an enclosed or covered or whatever deck that's going to be included in that 30%, we're talking about 1% of 1%. So to make
That's why I think a roof area capture is part of that. Let's say if you have a fairly large covered porch on an existing house, that element becomes visually part of the structure.
Absolutely.
So but let's say if it had a small front porch and they want to do an addition with a large covered deck or something and say, well, I can get my large covered deck, not necessarily, because you're looking at your total roof area and you can add 30% of roof area. It's really hard to cover all the bases. Roof pitch is particularly tough in my mind. I mean, it would be pretty easy to say, match the roof pitch, but you take a look at this picture here, and let's say that this was an existing house and they were converting upstairs attic space to finish and wanted to put a big shed dormer on the front. They haven't added any roof pitch. I mean, they haven't added any roof area. Mm-hmm. They have added, they're now finishing maybe more finished area, but the area you might say was there. So some of those really fall between the cracks and they're hard to get at. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So a person could come with just an upstairs addition, so that even that falls outside of, you might say, those 4 points that I like for basically an addition. If you're finishing off an attic and put a big, huge dormer on there, it might meet the criteria of not coming before the Historic Review Board. And of course, we're talking about non-designated houses, but still, it could be really ugly. So
Yeah, it could change.
Yeah.
It would change it.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
So, in my mind, that's one of the toughest areas. But decks, I think, are less of a problem.
I still have this overall concern about buildings going in that detract from the McLoughlin neighborhood itself, that detract, and how do we not open the door so wide where all of a sudden we're inviting in something that ends up being populating the district up with designs and things that are not compatible to the district or could be detracting. And that's just so the line that we draw.
Right, well, design guideline, I mean,
Yeah.
there's got to be some guidelines.
Yeah.
I mean, you're restricting more than what is today. So these are not designated structures. Someone can come out today and remodel the whole front of their house and
And that's
never
what,
get.
that's what that image is.
Yeah.
Right.
And that, well, that image is also, in a sense, the original height was a one-story, it was a one-story with
Right.
a more traditional, that front porch was kind of there. And so they upped the height and added the dormer. So, but they were still under the 30%. So, I think a change in the definition of height would have sent this in front of you, right? So you are constraining some pieces of this with what you have.
So how about a second floor deck? And I'm looking at you, Paul, specifically, because you were talking about elements that do detract, and if this is allowed as an addition, how do you feel about a small added second floor deck?
I think we need a matrix. Just need some examples to work with a matrix where we can kind of see how it gives us some type of containment against things that we know we don't want.
Small is subjective. How small is small?
That's right.
Great question.
Yeah, that's,
4 by 6, that's pretty small.
yeah, and I guess we're threading the needle, and Paul, to your point, I don't think we're necessarily trying to throw the door open wide, we're trying to define the doorway.
Yes.
Right.
And that's the challenging part. We want to define it so that genuinely straightforward projects have a good, clear.
And I can help. I think there's easy sideboards, like a little small second story, master bedroom, drinking some coffee on the back of your,
Yeah.
That's fine. But we've also seen people trying to do a second story deck that's,
Yeah.
it's like you're at the beach, where they build these giant
Exactly.
second story decks. So we can create a sideboard that allows the first and doesn't allow the second.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Now, here's one that just comes to mind, and I think slow, so I may email some more thoughts.
That's great.
And I chew on this a little bit, but
Yeah.
what about, what comes to mind is a deck, an upper floor deck, if it came within the confines of the structure. That certainly isn't going to catch all of them, but your little carve out for a little master bedroom deck or something like that. If it's, in a lot of cases, people will want to maybe put an attached deck, but now that becomes a very different appearing element. If this deck is 10 feet off the ground, and what is small, is a 10 by 10 master bedroom deck on a,
That is not
a 6
small.
by 8, is that okay? Probably not.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of proportion. I don't know, where would you find a carve out for something like that was definable in this matrix of things that the staff looks at?
We can take a look.
Well, I do think it's maybe second floor decks, are never going to be allowed under, this exemption for alterations or additions, and that's totally fine. I think, staff just needed clarity. So again, this is trying to really clarify what gets measured and how it gets measured for staff, sitting on the desk, handing out permits or saying, oh, wait, you need to go in front of the HRB for this, or, so defining this is, sounds like we're really focusing in on roof area, enclosed roof area or not, and sort of trying to find some guardrails around that. I guess I would ask whether at grade decks, you know, if they're slightly over that 30 inches that you need a building permit, are you open to that?
I
And
myself
we
am
can
not-
work further on what that means later.
I'm not myself
Yeah.
really too much hung up on uncovered decks
Yeah.
on main level. And,
Okay.
you know, it might start at 4 feet and it might be 7 feet because the ground's sloping away.
Yeah. we
In
can
my
work on that.
mind, I don't want that included, you might say in footage to justify a larger addition, but I
Right.
don't see that as a factor there again. I mean, if we decided that you would accommodate, you know, a 30% deck increase if they're doing an addition and they want to wrap the deck around the corner to get access to
Sure.
to the addition, you know, that makes some sense. So, I mean, I can see that as being an optional part of the matrix where, you know, you can increase 30% if you're increasing your enclosed area 30%, and then maybe you can connect your deck around to a new bedroom addition or something like that. That makes sense to me, but otherwise I don't see a problem myself with, you might say, a main level deck.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm less concerned about the main level as I am the second floor. And I'm okay with second floor. There's many examples in our neighborhood of second floor decks that are beautiful. You know, they're like 3 by 4. And they're basically just enough to put a couple chairs out on it and sit in the
Now, are
evening.
they typically something that sticks out, like with a couple posts holding them up?
Mhm.
Or okay.
Yeah, or in some cases, no posts holding them up. Just
They're
the way it's
cantilevered.
cantilevered.
Yeah.
So, but you know, just across the street from me, they have one. And it's,
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
never use it, but it's
Yeah.
lovely that they have it.
Yeah, yeah.
But any much bigger than that, then I'd say
So-
probably not.
Okay.
Would,
Great.
Yep, we could add that into the matrix. We can come up
Yeah,
with
definitely.
different scenarios.
Perfect.
yeah.
Okay, I think, one more slide, but it's really just, you know, goals for next meeting. Again, just continuing to refine all of this, and I think we made really good progress tonight. I appreciate all your thoughts. Really,
Is it appropriate, once again, as we kind of think over some of these things, if we come up with some thoughts, to just go ahead and email them to Christina? So-
please do.
Because
And we can.
some of this stuff I chew on and think about for a while, and then,
Yeah.
I would love to, if you could copy them too, so sometimes. if
yeah,
we-
is that,
That Christina would have to do it.
Send to me and ask me, and I will forward them to the board. Say, can you forward these to the board?
so if we email something to you and want it shared around to the board members, we
Yep, I'll do
request
that, and I'll
that.
BCC
I mean,
so
'cause
no
I
one
don't-
replies all and gets stuck.
Any input from any other board members, and I would like to hear from Julia as well, her thoughts.
Yeah.
So if there's emails that come in that can be shared,
Mm-hmm.
it can,
As long as it goes through Christina.
As long as it goes
Yeah,
to me.
That
And I
would be
BCC
wonderful.
everybody.
so am I correct then that if we email and if we just say, please share it with the
Yep.
other board members?
Yep,
Okay.
I'll do
All
that.
right.
Terrific.
And then I'll CC Kristen.
Great. I think I'm
Thank you
done.
for the discussion too.
Thank you
Thank
very
I
much.
really appreciate the way you summarized the survey and the open house, because, you know, it was all in, and I read the comments, but it was very helpful having you summarize and group those together. I think it was
Mhm.
a great presentation, honestly.
It ends up being not so simple.
Always is.
When you're
Isn't
trying,
that the truth?
when you're trying to do it with care, you know, and I appreciate the team.
Yeah. And when sometimes you can make it more
And
complicated,
everyone.
and then you can simplify it. But sometimes you have to make things more complicated. Just like when you clean your house, it's messy, and then it gets clean again, right?
And know it that I still care about having affordable housing roofs where people can have basically a roof over their head And if we can create, I think that's one of the things the state and the governor is trying to appeal to us to think through, how we can do those things and trying to keep costs in line. In every way we can make it so that we can afford to have $100,000 house would be a dream.
I agree. I have two kids in their late 20s, and they're just throwing up their hands.
As long as the windows look right.
Yeah, just fix the windows. Okay, great. So you want to talk about the window?
Well, I mean, I did have one more slide in case we have time. It is 10 till 9.
Sure, we have time.
We're here.
Okay, one more slide. Sorry, sorry, Kay.
Go down one more.
Yeah. Great. So the Windows presentation, which was in February, I guess, was ever so slightly chaotic. I definitely take the blame for that. I think in hindsight, it might have been easier to have me give you some specific buildings to go look at, because I felt like maybe the concept of depth and trim was getting lost without a wall there next to all of those window samples that you can really gauge how that feels.
Yes.
So we can certainly go through these questions a little bit. What I heard from you was certainly on question number 2, I heard that you were still very open to the use of the proprietary Anderson material, which is partly vinyl, but that didn't necessarily mean that you were open to allowing 100% vinyl windows.
That's what I heard too.
Okay.
That was my take on it. My problem is that we don't have a crystal ball as to future materials. So I don't think that we should, exempt materials that we don't know exist yet, which
Yeah.
just creates more issues down the road where we then have to have another session to talk about allowing something that we don't know about yet.
Yeah.
So I think if there's something that we specifically do not want,
Is vinyl.
then we may be able to call that out specifically, but I think we have to be really careful about not knowing. I mean, we just live in a world of technology that changes pretty dramatically, quickly.
That's true, but, again, we've got to look at what's happening today.
Sure.
Right? And so, I personally don't have a problem if we had to have another meeting and say, okay, let's look at this new technology and let's see if we could do that. But for now, I mean, for what we see and what we have, I think we have to work towards that. But I agree with you. I mean, technology is always changing every day, but we can change that if we have to.
I mean, I think what any language would say is composite is okay, and even, a sort of, it wouldn't necessarily use any of these proprietary terms, Anderson Fibrex or any of that. So the goal is, I think, for all of this language is to be as inclusive as possible and just to define those things by what they are, material or depth or any of that, without saying who makes it.
Right, because you can have a manufacturer who is producing a vinyl window and calling it something else.
Yeah.
right?
That's true.
And they can call it a composite, but reality is it's not, it's a vinyl window. And when you obviously know what we're trying to get away from is we're trying to get away from a straight, flat vinyl window.
Right,
So,
okay. The other thing I heard very clearly was that you were all very comfortable with defining that windows either have to use the full dimensional exterior grids or just none at all and leave it, as either a fixed or a casement or whatever without any divisions whatsoever. Now, my question to you is, would you like to talk a little bit more about depth and trim as sort of two sides of the same coin? In other words, getting a shadow line on a window, or would you like me to give you some specific window installations here in Oregon City to go look at? And, I'm offering this, it'll definitely take me a little time.
I think that's the best use of time, though.
But I do think it will help all of us be on the same page about what it means to have a window that, is sort of forward of the siding, and what it means to have a window that has extra deep trim, and whether that can mitigate for, that loss of depth, if you will.
I'd love to see examples to.
yeah, I think that would be worth the time.
I'm going to go back to the two reps and ask them to help me, and I think they will, so.
Great.
So we can sort of table those parts of the discussion.
Some pictures of, in other words, of what you're,
Yes, and I will take pictures, but I also, I hope that at least some of you might be able to go actually look at these
well, I'm happy to go by, but
specific,
they probably won't want me standing up in their front bush.
Well, I do know, I mean.
They might not want you out with your camera either.
Yeah, I
Vice Chair
know.
Green's house is a good example of a fiberglass window, so that would be a nice one to look at.
Yeah.
I sent Christina pictures of an 1880 window that's existing at my house.
Nice.
It had a dog and a Christmas tree in it, in the picture, but
Okay.
but it was an original window.
Yeah. They don't make them like that anymore.
Well, the
Sadly.
rest of them are down the side. I took that window to a woodworking shop and I said, I want all of the new windows to be low E, but look just like this.
Yeah.
And I had a significant bill, but they did.
Okay, you
I
did.
think that takes us to question 6.
That's right. Yeah. Question 6.
But they did come in.
Which I definitely heard all of you express real concerns that you didn't want to go over a certain, make people construct things in a certain way that was going to add to the cost significantly. So I hear you that I think that is playing into all of these factors, really. So perhaps the last one I will ask you tonight is about trim. So that's question number 5. And it's not so much the depth of the trim, because I want us to talk about that in combination with the depth of the window, but it's more whether the trim around any new window should include, at a minimum, a projecting sill and anything else you wanted to specify. I mean, maybe the width of the trim should be specified in some way.
Well, I would say yes on the,
Yeah.
on the.
On the sill.
On the projecting the sill,
Okay.
yes. Because I think that just, anywhere you look in the city, you see that. And
Yeah.
and it's obvious when it's not.
Well, it's better building practices
Well,
anyway.
it really is, yeah, exactly. So, yes, I'd say that. And as for the trim itself, trying to manage that, hard to say. I mean, obviously you don't want a half-inch trim, you know.
And maybe that's what is the trim we don't want?
Right.
Well,
Yeah, there's a lot of different
I'd say,
trims
you know,
that-
3 to 4 inch trim is pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Especially if you've got a projecting sill that's gonna come out 3 to 4 inches, or whatever the
Yeah.
requirements would be. You know,
I think that it wouldn't be hard for us to find a minimum on trim width.
Yeah, in my mind,
2.5 is kind of,
that's too narrow.
that's,
I honestly think it should be 4.5. A lot of pseudo replacement, just use like a 5 4x4, 1x4 around it.
absolutely, yeah.
And that's really not the proportion that you would have seen. You would have seen 1x5 or 1x6, so 1x5 nominally 4.5 inches, I think is ideal. And I guess if the emails don't get shared around, you guys weren't privy to my rant. Krista and Christina got, but anyway, I checked with several dealers and just basically to summarize, my perspective is that there's very limited options on the market that fall and when I kind of started my rant, my wife says I should not send in these rants. But when I started on it, I was kind of starting from the perspective of a point I brought up last time, and that is what makes a window appear, you might say, a casual look, authentic or artificial, and it won't be whether it's fiberglass or what it is, because you have to get closer to look at it. That it's probably going to be like sash width and so forth, and we didn't really dive into that. So I started off from the perspective that some of those dimensions may be important, but before I finished it and went around and talked to some more dealers to see what's available, I don't honestly think that we have that flexibility.
No, the only thing I've ever seen is that Marvin Excellence, and that's
an expensive
it's
window.
a very expensive window.
So there are
And it
three
looks
choices.
fantastic.
Yeah. They're really, as I see it in the marketplace, and to your point, Paul, about wood windows, really, that's gone. For new construction, they won't meet the energy code. And so if there's any around anymore that still meet the energy code, they're going. The energy code ticks up more later this year, early next year. So manufacturers have to have enough capacity to manufacture their product to that standard and so forth. So in a moderate price range product, you have 3 options. You've got the Pella Impervia, you've got the Anderson 100, and you've got the Milgard Ultra.
Yep.
And the first 2 do not offer exterior grids. They only, and I think we're all on board that we like exterior grids. So that really only leaves the only product in the market that's, you might say, a moderately priced product is, if you want grids, would be the Marvin. So I don't think that we can put criteria about where glazing is and things like that, or all of a sudden every applicant that comes in wants an exception because they can't meet the criteria. And so you're welcome to share my email, Christina, if you want, with the other board members. But I went around to Truex, Edelin, Kemp Windows, and of course I have my own suppliers that I used to deal with and so forth, but they all sell the same thing.
Yeah.
You know that. So one other product is Sierra Pacific, but they don't have much market presence around here. They make a real nice window, but they're kind of an East Coast thing.
And it's a fiberglass?
What's that?
They make a fiberglass?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
They've got a combo window.
Okay. Well, I will endeavor to take photos and send you the locations so that you can go look for yourself. before the next time that we talk about windows, because I do think the trim depth and just the glass compared to the siding can make a big difference. So let's get those pinned down, and I can help you decide by giving you good information.
I would love to have Dave, who is a contractor, again, to give us some ideas about how we could suggest trimming out a window to
Well, I'm waiting to see the pictures.
Yeah.
You know, I did address that a little bit in my communication to,
is there a way
Christina.
we can get close enough to create?
There's problems there. And the picture that I sent, and I don't know if you've seen that, I used the Milgard Ultra windows on my house.
Okay.
And so I have 3/4 siding and 3/4 thick trim, which only brings you about a 1/4 inch in front of the frame, because
Right.
most of them project about 1 1/4 inches.
Yeah.
And the glass on the upper sash is out near the front, so your trim only projects out maybe a 1/2 inch past the glass, which
Right.
isn't very much.
Yeah.
Without using 5/4
But to make it
trim,
project
yeah.
out further, very much further, you've got really thick trim that looks out of proportion on the side.
That's
So
the
I'm very
concern.
interested to see
Right.
if the pictures or examples we can find are a current window product. See, that would
Yeah.
be.
Because any nail fin's gonna be,
Yeah, if it's a more traditional window with the sash set back, you've got that shadow line, but if you can't buy that window, you've got a problem, so.
Okay. Well, got my homework.
Well, thank you again, I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Christina, communications?
I have 2 pieces of communication. One, the city commission will be hearing the Historic Review Board's yearly report at the April 2nd meeting, so in about a week. The agenda goes out tomorrow. I took the January staff report that I wrote that had the list of the projects the Historic Review Board's been working on, and then an overview of the applications from last year. That's going to be repurposed and will be on the City Commission's agenda. Chair Powell said that he can make it. And Vice Chair Green will not be there, so invited, we can have up to 2 people show up. So if anybody else wants to accompany Chair Powell and make the presentation, let me know. And secondly, we have 2 applications coming to the board next month. We were going to do legal 101 training. I may have to move that 1 more month. If we want to spend more time on compatible change, we might make that a 6 p.m. work session. So I'm going to work with Carrie Richter, our attorney, to see just timing about that. And so just be heads up, I may be reaching out to you about a 6 p.m. work session.
Okay.
And I think was it your email, there's meeting Friday for meeting laws that,
Ethics?
what's that?
Is it ethics?
Yeah.
Oh, that might have come from our recorder team, from our city recorder, because of your roles.
Okay.
I did not send that. Those kind of things that related to the state would come from our city recorder.
I guess, I think I'll try to attend because I know that some of the issues you mentioned, like if more than 2 people show up at an open house and so forth, and so I guess.
And for those who've had the legal 101 training, Carrie will do that again. Carrie Richter, our assistant city attorney, will do that again. We're just trying to find the right month to fit with her schedule.
And
So
she
you'll-
covers a lot of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
As well.
Okay.
Okay, any communications from the board members? No?
Just thank you.
Okay. All right, well, then we are adjourned.